Elephant Thoughts is a educational support organization. We don't strictly work in the Indigenous communities, although very organically 80-90% of our work has turned out to be there over the last 15 years. And we target kindergarten to grade 12 or secondary 5 in Quebec.
Okay.
Our aims are very customized per community. In other words, we work with graduation support, helping schools get more kids through school. We work with connecting community to the education system, and combating apathy towards school, increasing attendance, connecting parents, elders, and even traditional knowledge back into the school systems. And really any support that the school sort of asks for, we try to formulate a customized solution based on our expertise of working in so many different areas, schools, both across the far north and around the world. Well, one of the areas I think is our philosophy that we are guests in the program, where we're there to offer resources, not necessarily always solutions, that we work on developing the solutions alongside of the community, and they're the most important voice that there is in the conversation. So when we go in and perhaps a school board is trying to increase graduation rates, then the first step is a lot of relationship building and consultation and finding the people that are already having real success in the community at a grassroots level and seeing how can we support them and take their best practices and help them do what they're doing and teach what they've learned to other people. And so the resources sometimes may be financial, or it may be people that are specialists in dealing with curriculum, what have you, but we take those areas that they're missing combined with what the real strengths are in the community. And I think we always start there. We always are mining for community strengths first. And in a lot of cases, a lot of the solutions exist right there. It's just more of supporting those solutions with whatever it needs to happen to bring them to the forefront and actually have them engaged in the education system. Well, we are teachers, so we're very data driven. So we are constantly running assessments with both students before and post programs, looking, for areas that they're increasing or not, both academically with attendance. We also look for a lot of qualitative factors as well. Our programs, we try not to ever be isolated to the school itself. We really try hard and have a number of tools that we've developed to engage the community in whatever we're doing and bring in more parents into the conversation and into the school and participating in their child's education. And so working with the parents, looking at changes in attitude towards education, apathy, simple things. Is the student after a certain time actually excited and wanting to go to school rather than fighting going to school in the morning? So we're looking for all of those factors, where we'd be looking for a number of meaningful engagements between the school and community members, between the school and elders. Has that increased after a program or continued program with us? A lot of the schools might cite one of their lack of successes to specialist teachers. We work a lot in STEM, and science teachers, math teachers are hard to find in the north sometimes. Yet there's a lot of science-driven people in communities. Could be nurses, doctors, dentists, resource people, mining people, etc., etc. Are we able to capitalize on some of those resources that are right there, rather than constantly looking for a solution that's very hard to solve? So, we'll be looking at all of that, and these creative solutions to these challenges that are faced by running a school in a rural or remote environment. So it's data on student success, but it's data on community engagement. It's qualitative success stories on parents and children and people getting involved. So we try to be very comprehensive that way. we're not an Indigenous educator, first and foremost. We facilitate Indigenous educators. We have a number of people. We run an outdoor ed facility in the area called Kimbercote Center, where we have an Ojibwe medicine man that does teachings with Native and non-Native kids. We are involved in a major project right now that's building an Indigenous culture and arts center in Collingwood, and that's going to be a place for reconciliation and again getting Native and non-Native people together. When we're working in an Indigenous school, our job is to fill in the blanks that they don't have. We're not teaching people to be Indigenous or necessarily connecting them with culture. What we'll do is we will, if I'm doing an environmental education program, I'm out on the land, I will hire elders to join us. And so when we're teaching contemporary science, the elders at the same time will be teaching the traditional knowledge and the language. So, from my perspective, it's a little bit different. I mean, from an organization like ours, Indigenous education just means starting at a place of respect and starting at a place of recognizing that we are not working with non-Native kids. We're not working with kids necessarily from the South. We're working with kids who live in a different culture and a different paradigm, and we want to figure out what makes the most sense for those kids and build an education system that those kids can thrive in based on their culture and their indigeneity. And that means bringing local people alongside us and working alongside us to do that, to inform us of best practices and to actually fill in the blanks of the pieces we don't have. When we work with students, we've recognized a long time ago that even though we might be hired for an academic piece, increased graduation rates, combat low attendance, it starts with a very holistic approach to the student. We have to look, and all of our education is very student-centric. A lot of these kids are facing challenges that a lot of other kids don't, and quite frankly, they're not challenges that they created. The schools across the north deal with underfunding. They deal with lack of access to qualified teachers. They deal with the fact there's very few school boards in the north that are supporting them with both relevant curriculum and best practices and support when necessary. Resources are tight. It's a challenge, and then when you layer on top of that the social aspects and the history, which also creates challenges, especially in areas of attendance and whatnot, these students are starting from a place of, this isn't set up for me to succeed in a lot of areas. I've worked closely with many schools with with less than a 2% graduation rate, and when you're faced with that going in as a student, you're not expecting to succeed. It's not part of your vocabulary, graduation, when only 2 out of 100 ever go from kindergarten to a high school diploma. And so we don't start with the system, we start everything with the student. What is the needs of this particular student? A student we could be working with might face the fact that he lives in a household of 13 people with only a few bedrooms and one washroom, and sleeps on a couch at night with 3 or 4 other little kids, and then has to fight for space in the washroom and get up in the morning and get off to school. And that's a real challenge. It wouldn't happen in my household very well. And so, working with that student and trying to build a system around that student instead of what necessarily the norm and the expectations are. That student I'm happy with every day that student can come on time. I shake their hand and pat them on the back because I know what an incredible feat it is to be there and get there on time. We look at confidence with the students. It's if a student is thinking, I will never graduate, that's not in my mindset. It's not important to me, my friends aren't graduating, what have you, or I can't, or whatever is holding that student back. emotionally, mentally, we'll start there. We'll start building their confidence, and we have a lot of sort of ways of doing that first before we're really worried about the academic program. We're first concerned about that student's emotional space. How do you feel about sitting in this room? Are you excited to learn? Are you excited about what the opportunities, coming forward to you are? Or are you in a place, I don't want to be here, this is boring, or I can't do this, or I'm never going to be able to do this? So we work there first. We try to build their confidence, and that this is something very achievable, and that they are very good at. They just don't know it yet. We work with attachment as a big part of dealing and working with Indigenous kids. These kids see teachers come and go all the time. It's, they either get very attached to them and then they're gone in a year or two, or they withhold from becoming attached to a teacher because they know they may be gone in a year or two, and that's a symptom of the North, of the very transient educators that come and go. It's good that people are going because there's a problem and a deficit, but on the other hand, it is not the perfect solution. The perfect solution would be that the teachers are all qualified community members. So these kids are at a deficit there, and without attachment to the school, because their parents may not have had attachment, and their grandparents that have come out of residential school are not attached to the education system, the kids aren't attached to the teachers because they're so transient, then they can lack some intrinsic motivation. I know when I was in elementary school in a small town that the teachers that were at that school were constantly, I wanted to perform for them. I had love for them. I had respect for them. I was attached to them. I wanted to perform not just for them, but for myself. And though they were people that always had my back. If, they may not be my teacher 5 years later, but if they heard about me slipping, they'd be on my case. And that's important in an education system. It's a motivator of students. So we have a lot of tools and strategies to try to develop attachment as quickly as we can, and genuine attachment in an arena that's sometimes difficult to do that. But the performance of a student when you get that is infinitely better. It doesn't look the same anywhere. We could have teachers on the ground in the school year round, depending on the resources and the requests. We could be a short-term contract. Short-term, we might have a school have us rewrite the provincial curriculum so it's pertinent to that community, and we'll gather a team of community members and curriculum specialists, and we will take that curriculum and make sure that it is accessible to the students and relevant to the students it's teaching. We could be, we're hired, a big chunk of what we do is communities bringing us in to really engage the community in the education system, and we could spend a month, we could spend 2 months, and we would be working alongside teachers, we'd be working with students, but we'd also be doing a lot in the after hours with community and what have you, and and elders and kids, and getting them together, and so it is different everywhere. STEM is a big piece of Elephant Thoughts and STEM education, and part of that is because of the lack of science and tech and math specialists in the North, but there's also a lot of jobs in the North on those, in those fields, resources and mining and nursing, etc., etc. So we brought in, sometimes it's just because of our really cool, fun, exciting STEM programs. And what we've found, and why does an organization like ours, who has really been formed to combat inequality and to provide education to any kid anywhere that's just not getting an acceptable standard. Why has STEM become such a big part of us? Well, because we found it's one of the best tools that we actually use. You take a telescopes and inflatable planetariums into a community, and you invite, you're doing workshops in the schools, and you're hiring local people, cultural teachers alongside you that are teaching the traditional constellations and stories and connecting it to the land, and then you open it up wide to the community, and people are curious and they're interested. And I've had lineups of 300 community members behind one telescope, everybody waiting to see Saturn, and it becomes this big community event, and all the storytelling and sharing that's happening around the telescope is more important than what's happening at the telescope. And so we found that science for us is a really amazing tool. It gets kids engaged and parents engaged, and it creates curiosity, and it and then again creates attachment to the education system. Programs, if we've been with our STEM programming, if we go back to a school that we've been going to for a number of years, it may be facing a 40% attendance on any regular day, and then Elephant Thoughts comes to town, and all of a sudden it's 85, 90, and because the kids are aware that they're going to get to participate in this, so it's bringing them back and reconnecting them with the school. So a STEM program could last a week, it could again last a month, so it is very different everywhere. The commonalities that we're looking for, though, are always, as much as possible, bringing the community into the program, as much as possible, mining resources from the community to participate, as much as possible, leaving behind training, resources, and even ongoing support when we're done. So those are common threads, but the duration could be anything. My hopes would be that, first of all, the funding gaps would be solved. I mean, there's most schools are facing a 30 to 35% gap in funding compared to a provincial school, which makes no sense to me, especially when education in some of these communities is much more expensive. So hopefully that will get solved. I'm an advocate for school boards and forming, I've seen it work in provinces like Nova Scotia, where they have a board called MK, which is the education director from every reserve in the province, and they have one of the strongest education systems across Canada, Indigenous education systems, because they have the support of another body. They're not an isolated little school in the middle of a very remote area with a lack of support. I'm in favor of more and more of that thing popping up. I think it's incredibly beneficial to the schools to be sharing best practices and resources and supporting each other where need to, as well as creating accountability and not and I'm definitely, there's a huge need for more and more local teachers. I mean, those three pieces unfortunately are not pieces that Elephant Thoughts are involved in, so but I do see them as the most important pieces to the puzzle. And and in the meantime, we're happy to be there in a support role as much as we possibly can. I guess where my vision would go is, my vision would be that we're no longer needed, and that would be fantastic. It's the aim of every charity is to work themselves out of business. So if we were no longer in business in that area, then that would be fantastic, because that means those issues are solved. In non-native communities, we label First Nation or we label Indigenous, and we think that's one peoples, and of course it's many people speaking many languages and many cultures, and the Maliseet and the Gwich'in are not the same people, and would require in a proper education system resources that are pertinent to each, and especially when language also gets involved in the mix. So that is the challenge, because there are so many different languages and cultures and people, to create the resources that each group really has to create the best possible education system for them. and the most pertinent and the most relevant and the most effective. But ideally, that's where we would go. More and more resources. You can always start at the base. A provincial curriculum is a place that we've often started, and you can take that curriculum and those expectations, and then reframe them and rework them to become more relevant to the population you're teaching, and more of that going on. I think is one of the ways to go, and so um, it's creating resources that are particular to the group that you're actually teaching more and more about.